Story 1. My 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science teacher poured soda on my bully's head after she saw him shove me into a wall. She used the same phrase he had used after he shoved me. "Oh, sorry. Didn't see you standing there." I can still hear it in her wispy, faintly German-accented voice. Probably the best day of my middle school life. Certainly the most memorable. This was the late 1980s. There were no repercussions for her. Story 2. I hope we can. We definitely try at my school. When a child feels they didn't receive help, it could be due to a few factors. It's important to clarify that I am not suggesting it's acceptable for a bullied child to go unsupported. The two sides. If no one witnessed the incident, we often end up with conflicting claims about who bullied whom. The worst bullies are adept at being sly. However, without clear knowledge of what happened, we cannot impose severe consequences, especially without facing significant backlash from a bully's parents. We have to communicate that while we understand a child may dispute their actions, what transpired is completely unacceptable. Overuse of the term bullying. Parents and children sometimes use the term bullying to describe behaviors that are merely annoying or rude. For example, if Max accidentally bumps into someone, and that child claims Max is bullying them, it creates a false narrative that can stick. This overuse can lead to teachers missing the actual instances of bullying. Online issues. Many incidents of bullying occur online and resurface in school, making it difficult to grasp the complete context after a group of children has been arguing in an online chat. As teachers, we manage multiple classes a day, and investigating these matters can be overwhelming. Complexity of situations. We are not judges in a courtroom where arguments are presented clearly. The situation can be convoluted. For instance, 5 children may claim one child was aggressive, while their friends might deny it. Often, the accounts evolve, adding further confusion. Understanding the truth in these scenarios can be challenging for those outside of the school environment. Insufficient funding and staffing. Teachers have their lessons to deliver, and there often isn't enough funding to provide staff dedicated to pastoral care. Parental bias. Many parents tend to believe their child's perspective without question. I anticipate that I might receive negative feedback for this, which may suggest that my colleagues and I do not care or try. However, we genuinely do care. We make every effort, particularly when we are aware of the facts. We strive to listen, uncover the truth, and respond fairly. It is simply quite challenging. Some may advise, start by believing every child. But there is a contradiction when a so-called bully claims to be the victim. Additionally, bullies are often victims themselves in different contexts. Story 3. Of course we try, but parents are the biggest challenge we face. Here are some real examples from my career. A bully was given detention. Parents complained that the detention was unfair due to their child's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and he could not be kept in during recess, lunch, or after school. The same bully was suspended. Parents argued that this was unfair, claiming he only made racist comments due to his attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They escalated the issue to school leadership, resulting in the suspension being overturned. The bully was moved to a different class. However, many parents in the new class complained about the bully's presence, so he was moved back. The bully called a child a derogatory name. Parents were notified, and the bully's father's response was, "Child's name? Well, he is a derogatory term, isn't he? What's the problem?" The bully's parents were contacted, and they threatened to sue the school, arguing that their child is autistic and therefore cannot be held accountable for his actions. As a result, the bully faced no consequences. Story 4. As a high school teacher who was bullied myself in school, I find it incredibly challenging to address bullying. Here are some significant reasons. 1. Victims often believe we know about their situation and are ignoring it, but we genuinely do not. I usually have 30 students in each of my classes. In a previous province with a different contract, that number sometimes reached the 40s, with me as the only adult in the room. Additionally, I have students with individualized education programs, commonly known as special needs. I'm struggling to provide everyone with the education and guidance they deserve. Yet there is so much to monitor, and I often miss important issues. Often, especially in physical education, I intervene when I think I witness bullying, only for the involved students to insist they are friends just joking around. For instance, when one student smacks a ball out of another's hand, it could be seen as playful banter among friends, but is considered bullying when done to a regular classmate. I have only a basic understanding of these students' relationships and may sometimes give them the benefit of the doubt when I probably shouldn't. Addressing these issues feels like a game of whack-a-mole, where I often hit the wrong target by accident. Teachers are not adequately trained to handle these situations. It's regrettable but true. We are trained on what to do in the event of a physical fight, essentially advising, don't get involved, call the office, due to liability concerns. As a female teacher who is generally well-liked and has a background in contact sports, I can sometimes cautiously insert myself into a situation when boys are fighting, knowing they will usually stop to avoid hitting me. However, this approach alone poses a significant risk. When emotional or psychological bullying is brought up, we are told there is no one right answer. Everything is case by case. Just use your judgment and know your school's protocols, which is completely unhelpful advice. The burden of proof. When a student tells me they are being bullied, which is very rare, I have little power in that situation and risk making it worse for them. If there is no proof, I usually offer the student a few options for what I can do. Regardless of the choice, I will do my best to keep them separated. Do they want me to speak to the bully? I can offer to do so without exposing the student by implying I might have witnessed the incident or that several others have mentioned it to me. Unfortunately, the bully will still be around, and the last thing I want is for them to retaliate against their victim for coming to me. I can try to coax the bully into admitting their actions and keep a record of our conversations, but without concrete evidence, the bully and their parents will likely deny everything. Lack of effective punishments. Even when a student is caught bullying, the punishments are often lenient or ineffective. Often, the most effective discipline and rehabilitation must come from parents, and if a student is bullying, there is a high chance their parents are not addressing the issue. They may go home and reframe their child as the victim, unable to accept that their child is a bully, ultimately rewarding poor behavior. I can have a student throw a chair across the room. Rare, but it happens. And I know that even after my conversation with administration, that student will likely be back in my class. Expelling a student is incredibly challenging. Even suspensions these days often involve the student remaining in school but sent to a designated office. In my experience, students are sometimes returned to the classroom early, either because administration does not want to deal with them or because the student deceives them with seemingly good behavior. I can recount an incident where a vice principal returned a student to my class without warning. I had to plan lessons around this student, who should not have been in my class that morning. An hour into class, I received an email from the vice principal stating the student had learned their lesson and would return, having agreed to some probationary rules. I wished she had informed me beforehand, as the student can be very manipulative. They took advantage of the lack of communication and violated probation within the first half hour. Did the student face consequences afterward? Absolutely not. Parents are often unable or unwilling to intervene. I frequently contact parents regarding their children's behavior, only to hear them casually say, "Yes, he's doing it at home too. I can't get him to stop," indicating they have given up. This is the case more often than not. Teachers are more stressed than you realize and lack the capacity to manage it. Approximately 50% of teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. Teaching is incredibly demanding, and in Canada, it has become significantly more challenging over the past decade. I generally teach from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., coach, unpaid, from 3:30 p.m. to 5 p.m., and then plan lessons and grade from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Often, I struggle to sleep during the early hours of the morning, worrying about students I believe are struggling. Depending on the season, I frequently coach tournaments on weekends. School districts have pushed students with exceptionalities, such as those with high-needs autism, into regular classrooms under the guise of inclusion to cut costs on designated spaces and additional staff. Teachers are not adequately trained for the current classroom dynamics, and support in the classroom is continually reduced. Inclusion without support equates to abandonment. Teachers are left to salvage an impossible situation, and we are blamed for not making it work. Honestly, I am drowning. My mental and physical health is declining, and I may leave the profession, even though that would mean a pay cut and missing out on the aspects of the job I love. The retirement of baby boomers and the overwhelming experience faced by young teachers have strained the system, with additional burdens placed back on the teachers. I want nothing more than to connect with and help my students thrive, but I am struggling to cope. When people reach out to me, it is usually to demand more or criticize what they think I'm doing wrong. Do you know what it's like to struggle through an entire day of teaching, overwhelmed with tasks to complete before the next day, only to have a student come to you and say they will harm themselves if they go home? I do. I am grateful that they confided in me, but it is a challenge to handle this situation under the current circumstances. Please show appreciation for your children's teachers, especially the younger ones. Even a simple email can serve as a temporary lifeline. Many of us are barely holding on. Story 5. Administrators and parents. I used to be a teacher in a primary school, and one of the students in my class had a history of trauma and frequently hit his classmates. Every day, at least one child would come crying about him throwing punches. As much as we wanted to keep him indoors away from other kids or physically restrain him, the reality is that doing so can have serious consequences for the school and the teachers involved. In the end, we could only advise other children to stay away from him and have the teacher on yard duty monitor him, intervening when he started acting out. While some teachers may not perform well, the reality is that parents are often a significant factor in both preventing and perpetuating bullying. Families inflict trauma on their children, who then lash out at others. Some families believe their children can do no wrong and threaten to sue the school or the teacher for intervening with their child. Administrators also contribute to the challenges teachers face regarding how to help children. There is often a lack of clear procedures in response to bullying and a lack of support. Teachers find themselves caught between administrators and parents. While I am not claiming that teachers are flawless, most are simply powerless. This contributes to the high burnout rate among educators, particularly in the country where I am from. Story 6. Some did and others joined in. I witnessed a teacher mock a student to her face in front of the class in high school. He simply didn't care. Story 7. As a student teacher, I faced challenges with the culture and administration. One student shaved his head to look tough and was dress-coded for it. This was disappointing because the other kids admired his look. I addressed him in a way that portrayed him as a rebel, which was the best I could do under the circumstances. Other students were bullied for being artistic. I encouraged them to create illustrations of their peers, which was well received, and to experiment with graffiti-style graphic design or the aesthetics of popular bands. I believe this helped them express themselves. There are more effective ways to encourage students' creative outlets and help them develop valuable skills than simply punishing bullies. While this approach may lead to some people-pleasing behavior and social manipulation, it remains beneficial. Story 8. I remember a child who was assaulted by several students in elementary school. The school did nothing, so the family sued the parents of those involved. Story 9. I remember my first year of secondary school when a kid bullying me told me he was going to punch me in the face as soon as class finished. I asked the teacher if it would be possible for me to leave class slightly earlier because of this threat, and I explained exactly what was said. She said no. When class ended, everyone got up, I made my way out and received a fist straight to the face, ironically right in view of the teacher who was still standing at the front of the classroom. Needless to say, I was extremely upset, and my parents later verbally criticized the teacher for her negligence. Story 10. Because it can be practically impossible, at least at my school. The way our support system is set up, bad behavior often gets rewarded. Students who cause trouble receive much more leniency before facing consequences, and they are often withdrawn from class to play basketball or engage in other activities, supposedly to help them regulate their behavior. If a student acts out enough, they may not see any consequences since consequences tend to worsen their behavior. Moreover, the nature of consequences has changed. We have to be very careful. Consequently, many of these students are often the bullies. This leads them to feel they can act with impunity, which they indeed can. A few other shorter reasons include Politics. Parents. Volatile students often come from volatile parents. Bullying usually does not happen in front of teachers, making it nearly always a he said, she said situation. If we choose to believe what she said because she is a good student and he is seen negatively, parents may perceive this as profiling or generally unjust. Expulsion is not an option at my school, so the harshest consequence is suspension, which effectively rewards those students. With bullies, we are often working against their difficult home lives. It is challenging to view the bully as solely at fault when they are experiencing trauma at home, leading to a level of compassion and understandable patience with them. Dealing with bullying is undoubtedly the hardest part of the job to navigate successfully. Story 11. I am still teaching and actively helping, but it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole. Stop one bully, and another appears. The real problem is not just the bullies. It is the broken system that gives us no real authority to stop them. We cannot suspend students, call parents without mountains of paperwork, or even separate students without parental permission. It is madness. Story 12. When I was a child, teachers told me it was my fault for being different, and that helping me would only encourage the bullies. Story 13. My close friend, who is a teacher, says it can be difficult for her to assist because of the backlash she may face from parents. When she tries to help and seek punishment for the bully's parents often come to the school and accuse her of siding with the actual victim. Everything seems to be against teachers these days. Story 14. Some bullies grow up to be teachers, perpetuating the problem. Teachers are bound by regulations, and their powers are limited. Some parents are unhelpful. Story 15. I will use pronouns such as we and us in this discussion. This does not refer to a universal we. It is specific to my country and teaching cohort. There is identifiable one-sided bullying and subtle, deniable bullying, where the bully traps the other person in a situation where any observer will find them both at fault. The former is what you see in movies with locker shoving and the like. It barely exists where I teach. I haven't seen an example of it in years. The latter looks like an absolute mess to a teacher who wasn't part of it from the beginning. I will break down what we see and what we can do. First, it often looks like two boys bumping into each other, laughing, and trading nicknames. You might suspect that one of them is not actually enjoying the banter but is trying to save face in front of the other boys and remain silent. What if they do speak up? Well, bullies are well aware of the phrase, "Teacher, he's bullying me," and there's no guarantee they won't be the first to say it. I have seen both parties admit who actually started it a total of 5 times. Otherwise, it becomes a cycle of accusations. He said it first. No, he gave me an insulting look first. I wasn't looking at you. Of course you were looking at me, you took my lanyard. You were hitting me with it. This repeats indefinitely. You can ask and conduct a full-scale investigation. You can ask other students and make the entire class sit there and learn nothing while you try to figure it out. For times out of 5, you will get nowhere. We lack a way to cut through the nonsense, and despite what movies from the 1980s tell you, bullies are often very smart and socially aware. Girls bullying each other often occurs completely out of sight. We can't stop it without complete knowledge. We can only deal with the aftermath. If it happens in front of us, it's often through isolation. It doesn't come to notice when a girl chooses one seat over another unless there's an audible "ew" or "go away," which has never happened in my presence. Now, let's say we have seen unmistakable bullying with solid evidence. This happens occasionally. Let's bring in behavior management tools. Asking them to stop, deans, discussions in hallways, monitoring, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, and expulsion. Asking them to stop is not as effective as you might think, often for reasons you wouldn't guess. Many bullies genuinely believe their victim has wronged them in some way, even if just by annoying them with their mannerisms. They truly believe they are achieving justice. The deans are even more removed than we are, and their job is to maintain peace, not seek justice. They aren't detectives and don't have a court. They just want students to calm down and get back into the rhythm. Discussions in the hallway only have long-term effects if the student respects you and realizes that they were wrong. Otherwise, you may receive a dismissive response, And unless you have a substitute to cover the class, you have to end the talk sooner rather than later. Monitoring. If you give the problem student the relentless supervision they require, you cannot provide individual support to all the learners in the class. You can only choose one. What about kicking them out of class or school? Not so fast. It is illegal to remove a student from a learning environment they are used to without extensive documentation. In-school suspension takes months to gather enough evidence for approval. Out-of-school suspension takes over a year. Expulsion requires years of constant repeat offenses and documentation. Sorry, kids. Story 16. As someone who was bullied in front of my 6th grade teacher 30 years ago, and she did nothing, I hope karma reached her and the bully who later became a teacher. Karma did come to another bully who acted in front of her. He was struck by a bus many years later. When I found out, I felt a sense of satisfaction about how he faced his consequences. Story 17. I'm not a teacher, but my mom is, and I can guarantee that most of the time when a teacher doesn't take action, it's because the administration or higher-ups don't want anything done. As many comments have already noted, often it's out of fear of retaliation from parents, but retaliation from administration is just as detrimental. There was once a situation in a colleague's class where a group of students were bullying another student for being the only black girl in the class. They called her derogatory names, passed around a paper with racial slurs written on it, and made comments about slavery to her face. The colleague went to the principal multiple times trying to get something done, but the principal always responded with statements like, "You didn't see which kid threw the paper, so we can't punish anyone." Despite having previously required teachers to investigate incidents thoroughly, the child said he was very sorry and won't do it again. So what more do you want? Even though the child repeated the behavior the next day. Clearly, you are the problem and not the child, because no one has documented any misconduct in his file. Maybe you should take additional training on managing students better. The principal and vice principal have also retaliated against teachers who tried to take action without going through them by assigning more challenging students to their classrooms while reducing their access to support and spreading rumors about their competence to other teachers. This is an extreme situation, but often teachers want to make a difference but are not allowed to. Story 18. Genuine question here. What do you expect them to do? In our current society, where it seems like most people think it is cruel to send a child to bed early as a punishment, what can the school realistically do? Story 19. When I was in 11th grade in 2011, a teacher was suspended for trying to break up a fight because he had to physically touch the students to do so. I believe such rules contribute to the problem. Story 20. If you don't help them, something bad is bound to happen. When I was in 9th grade English, a student started a pile of "your mom" jokes. After a few weeks of the teacher doing nothing and other students joining in, I impulsively grabbed the hardcover of The Grapes of Wrath that we were reading and hit him on the head as hard as I could. He fell to the ground, and everyone reacted as if I had done something crazy, but I felt relieved after enduring weeks of kids talking about my mother. The teacher actually tried to cover it up because she realized she would have to explain why she did nothing. I could have really hurt him, and I would have faced charges for assault. Story 21. I used to resent teachers for this until one told me, "Look, you have obvious issues. We can address physical bullying, but it often results in the victim receiving the same punishment. Sometimes there is no choice. Occasionally, the victim snaps and retaliates against the bully. Part of you may feel the bully deserves it, but legally you have to stop the fight. However, most bullying is psychological. Bullies may put trash on a kid's lunch tray, spread rumors, shame, exclude others, or turn friends against them. There's often nothing we can do or prove, even when we witness it. Kids know that reporting incidents doesn't change anything or can even make the situation worse. Educators may be apathetic or feel powerless because what that bullied child doesn't understand is that almost everyone is enduring similar struggles. We see dozens of students each period, and I'm only one person. They must help themselves, snap, or suffer. No one will save them. Story 22. I requested a 2-week leave from school due to bullying. I specifically asked my teachers not to inform the other students about the reason for my absence. When I returned, everyone seemed to know. I asked someone what had happened, and they told me the teacher announced it to the class. These experiences led me to change schools. How can a teacher be so untrustworthy? She had a young son, unfortunately. Story 23. Admin complicates the situation. We want to achieve more than we currently can without the threat to our jobs. Additionally, our financial situation is not strong, so losing our jobs is not an option. Story 24. A friend of mine was a teacher at a private school. She was not allowed to intervene when certain students acted out, but there were limits to this restriction. This was due to the parents contributing significant finances to the school. Wealthy students often bullied those from less affluent backgrounds, solely based on their parents' status. She quit that job after the first school year. Story 25. Not a teacher. When I was bullied in school, one set of parents was informed by the teachers that their child was causing issues. What did she say? Not my child. That being said, my daughter had issues with a classmate who was throwing chairs at people. I made it clear to her that if it became a problem, she had permission to defend herself by any means necessary. I then called the school and informed them of the situation. They were aware of the issue but have limited resources and are forbidden from physically intervening. They are in a battle that they are destined to lose. All they can suggest is to ignore the disruptive behavior. Story 26. From an administrator's perspective, please explain clearly, as if I were 5. A child gets bullied. The bully faces no consequences. While the bullied child is told to ignore it or walk away, the bully continues to torment the child. Eventually, the child snaps and fights back. Somehow, the bully is considered the victim, and the bullied child gets punished by the school. Please clarify this situation. Additionally, all of the anti-bullying campaigns at school, such as assemblies and wearing an orange shirt, seem ineffective because they do not actually address the real problem. Does the administration truly believe that wearing an orange shirt will prevent bullying on the playground? Story 27. My bullies were children of prominent businesspeople in our small town. They made it very clear they intended to harm me or encourage me to take my own life. We lived next door to the school principal. One day, he came over and explained to my parents that he could not do anything more to protect me, and if they wanted to keep me safe, we needed to move elsewhere. The house went up for sale a week later. Story 28. Not a teacher but a student who was bullied in my younger years. In the later half of my elementary years, I was routinely bullied by 2 to 3 girls. However, I was always treated as the bully by the school. I was punished, which made them bully me more. I would often be cornered and yelled at, shoved, and called names. When I shoved back or tried to get away by pushing through them, I became the one seen by a teacher who came due to the commotion, and therefore I got in trouble. I received detention many times. I just wanted to be left alone, so I didn't mind detention much either way, sitting at a desk alone in the administration hallway. When I was informed that a school field trip was coming up, I cared more. I was told that if I received another detention, I would not be allowed on the trip to SeaWorld. Of course, the girls found out, cornered me again, and this time, I opted to start banging my head on the wall instead, unable to get away from them for fear that I would be blamed again. I repeatedly banged my head on the wall until a teacher showed up, and I still got blamed. I was banned from the field trip and sat at that desk all day long while they went on their trip. Decades later, I still resent that day and the school administration. Nothing my parents said on my behalf helped. I went to middle school a year later, and only one of the girls lived in the address zone for that school. The other 2 went to a different middle school due to their addresses. The lone girl didn't bully me anymore, likely because she didn't have the others. I often kept to myself, withdrawn, and my confidence suffered greatly. My husband and I went to SeaWorld a few years ago, and I shared that story with him and how I had always wanted to go but never had. We had a great time and built better memories. Story 29. I remember this happening to me. Teachers saw me getting bullied but didn't do much. Honestly, I think the system is flawed. We are expecting too much from teachers. There should be a dedicated security team hired for each school to supervise students and take action. Seriously, you place thousands of kids in a building and expect teachers to manage them? They can't do it. They are already busy with teaching. You need security personnel. Story 30. Serious consequences for the school and teachers involved, but no consequences for the bully, leaving kids afraid to go to school. What consequences will there be for the school? This is insanity. I was bullied, and I am still angry. It is the bully who should be sent to a different school. The focus should not be solely on the victim. If a teacher treated another teacher the way a bully treats a child, hitting, swearing, and insulting, would the victim be fired, or would the bully face consequences? And how many school shooters were bullied? No one thinks of that. Story 31. I tried everything I could within the system. I documented incidents, called parents, and involved counselors. However, when the bully's parents are lawyers who threaten to sue the school, the administration backs down quickly. The system is broken, not the teachers. Story 32. Sometimes, it's hard to tell what constitutes bullying and what are normal disagreements among kids, especially as they grow older and interact with many different teachers. If each teacher witnesses only one incident, they may consider it an isolated occurrence, even though a child could have experienced multiple incidents throughout the day. We don't always see it. Some bullies are quite sneaky. It took us a while to realize that one student kept tripping and purposefully bumping into another student, mainly because they were all quite rowdy during lineup time. Once we identify a bully, we have to follow specific interventions to try to correct the behavior. Legally, it is challenging to expel a student, so we must explore all other options first. I've noticed that these interventions are most effective when parents impose strong consequences at home and support the consequences enforced at school. Unfortunately, many parents either do not care, do not believe us regarding their child, or think it is acceptable for their child to be a bully because they believe other kids are too sensitive nowadays. I feel fortunate to work at a private school where our administration supports us and has informed parents that if they do not accept our consequences, they are welcome to seek another school. In public schools, however, parents can bypass us and even escalate the issue to the principal, threaten legal action, and often find someone who will support their case or someone they can intimidate, leaving us unable to take appropriate action against the bully. Story 33. I am a teacher in a kindergarten for children aged 2 to 6. Most bullying behaviors appear to be systematic, often stemming from the parents and family. When we encounter instances of children targeting others, we address the situation immediately and speak with the parents the same day. Thankfully, we usually manage to prevent escalation before it occurs. While these situations are resolved promptly, we continue to monitor the child involved. Such behavior is unacceptable under my supervision. In instances of bullying, our strategy is to have one teacher with the aggressors and another with the victims to ensure their emotional and physical safety. Additionally, we implement a mindfulness program for all our children to support and protect them. Story 34. I am not a teacher, but I am the parent of a severely bullied child. I conducted extensive research and spoke with every teacher and administrator up to the Department of Education. I attended every school board meeting to seek help. The simple answer is that they cannot do much. They are bound by laws and other regulations that prevent them from restraining the child and, in some cases, from doing more than telling the child to stop. Some do not care. A few aides at my child's school have stood by while my child and other children were bullied, doing nothing except advising them to stay away. The zero-tolerance policy has completely backfired. Mostly, it is the parents. Bullies often have bully parents who threaten, try to blackmail, and completely ignore evidence right in front of them, including videos from school grounds. These parents may also go to the media if they believe their child has been targeted, which has happened in our case as well. Story 35. I am going to stay quiet because I was bullied from grades 2 to 11. In grade 9, I was repeatedly punched in the face in front of my art teacher, Ms. Nightingale, who just sat and watched. Story 36. Honestly, most of the time it's special education. If the behavior is determined to be a manifestation of a disability, a teacher's hands are extremely tied. I was a special education teacher for 10 years and just quit last year. Story 37. Not a teacher, but these were the excuses I heard when I was 7 or 8 and getting beaten up at school, as well as on the way to and from school and at home, but that's a whole other story. Well, you got those bruises on the way home from school. We can't do anything. Well, you got those bruises on the way to school. We can do anything. Have you tried being nicer? Me? Well, those two are going through a lot. One kid's mom was dying of cancer, the other was dealing with their parents' divorce. I was living in a drug den. Well, talk to their parents. Made it so much worse. Well, they did beat you repeatedly with your recorder. Why did you give it to them? They stole it from my bag. Since I attended a small school, I had to deal with them from kindergarten through 12th grade. The boy whose mom died of cancer kind of turned inward after I lashed out. I said the only person who would ever love him was his mom, who had just passed. I regretted it immediately, but I was 8 and had more bruises from them than from my parents. The girl, however, continued to bully me and then befriended my best friend in 10th grade and tried to become my friend as well. I hold grudges, so I simply never engaged with her. In our final year of school, she confronted me, claiming she never hit me or bullied me when we were kids and asking why I didn't like her. I looked at her blankly and said, "I don't remember who you are. Why are you trying so hard?" She would always go on in creative writing about how much it sucked that no one seemed to remember her in her home life. Story 38. The only thing you can do with bullies is confront the bully or their parents. Any other approach simply does not work. Story 39. Disclaimer. I'm not a teacher, but I was bullied in middle school, and now my daughter is facing similar challenges. Though our environments are different, I attended a predominantly black school in the inner city, while hers is a more diverse but majority white suburban school. The core experience of bullying appears to remain the same. Now, seeing it from both the perspective of a former bullied kid and a parent, I've realized some hard truths. There are apathetic and even harmful teachers out there. Some educators treat bullying as an inevitable part of growing up, while others contribute to it. I vividly remember teachers who belittled students in front of the class, writing off certain kids as lost causes before they even had a chance. I doubt this mindset has disappeared since my school days. I believe most teachers genuinely care, but those who don't leave lasting damage. As a parent, it's frustrating to see this same dismissive attitude still present today. Many of the tactics teachers and administrators choose to deal with the situation, when they actually choose to intervene, are usually flawed forms of mediation. Some believe the best way to resolve bullying is through forced interaction, hoping kids will work it out or even become friends. I personally suffered under this tactic, and I feel it really hurt my ability to handle abusive situations as I grew older. I know they mean well, but this isn't a movie or a children's book. Forcing victims to engage with their tormentors only adds to their suffering. In real life, we teach people to walk away from toxic relationships, yet children are often told to tolerate and engage with those who harm them. This needs to change. I believe the real issue is the parents. In many cases, the root of bullying begins at home. Some bullies act out due to their own experiences with abuse or neglect, but just as often, they have parents who enable their behavior. Too many parents disengage, treating school as a holding area where their child's behavior is someone else's problem. Some hold the belief that their child shouldn't be held accountable for anything because they themselves do not enforce accountability. They blame everyone else for not being able to manage their kids, ignoring the child's involvement. In some cases, they actively paint their child as the victim in the situation and often threaten to take action against the school administration rather than take a proactive role in addressing their child's behavior. The rise in awareness of behavioral issues linked to mental or developmental challenges is positive, but it has also given some parents an excuse to avoid accountability for themselves or their child. It's unfortunate, but I've come to realize schools and staff can only do so much when the core problem isn't being addressed at home. Story 40. I graduated in 1993. I attended a small town school where everyone knew each other. I was the bullied kid and I just dealt with it. Teachers didn't help. In 10th grade, one of the worst bullies approached me in the hall while I was talking to a friend and began to insult me. 2 teachers were just a few feet away. Something snapped. I calmly handed my books and drink to my friend and asked her to hold them. I then turned to the bully and told her to be quiet. When she wouldn't, I unleashed my frustration. I landed numerous hits while she could only grab my hair. Those two teachers pulled us apart and took us to the office. Meanwhile, the whole school had fallen silent. Not one person believed I would ever act that way. I will never forget walking into the principal's office, where he leaned back in his chair with his hands behind his head and said, "It's about time." She was suspended for a week. I walked the halls and heard a lot of whispers, but I didn't care anymore. I never let anyone walk all over me again, and no one did. Story 41. As someone who went through elementary school being bullied and with no friends, it was upsetting that the teachers knew what was happening to me but stood by and watched. I want to ask why. Why didn't you help me? I was just one child. You saw them push me off playground equipment, down sharp hills and into a wasp nest. That was just the tame stuff. Why didn't you help? Story 42. This one hits so close to home that I have to comment. I have asked myself this question a lot too. The middle school and high school years have been the toughest of my life. I was bullied repeatedly for being overweight, and my abusive mother would beat me almost daily. I went to school with black eyes, cuts, and bruises, and no one would notice. I hoped my teachers would care, or that they would notice I was always alone at school, drawing at my desk in silence during recess. I never actively participated or engaged with others and was always excluded from group activities. I would sometimes cry in front of schoolmates and teachers. Some told me to man up and most simply ignored me. It was so blatant and obvious. If I got a bad mark or failed a test, you could bet that the next day I would show up covered in bruises. Fast forward many years, and I now work in human resources at a company that manages educational programs for public and private organizations. When I sense the same negligence, I put educational personnel on the fastest route to termination. I will never get the satisfaction of confronting my old teachers or the pleasure of firing them, but I am happy knowing I work for a company with rigid standards and that I will never enable child abuse. Story 43. In middle school, over half of my class was bullying me. I had pens thrown at the back of my head and was tripped multiple times while walking down the aisle or in the hallway. What upset me the most was when they would hide my backpack and belongings if I left the room. I was almost in tears in class when the teacher yelled at them to tell me where it was. However, she just seemed annoyed, not truly feeling bad for me. It was mostly the students involved in sports. This experience is why I quit sports when I entered high school. I didn't like being around them. This same school also had only 2 black students, and they eventually left because in the locker room, a few boys would joke about calling them slaves and using racial slurs. Unfortunately, those boys faced no consequences because they were favored by the teachers. Story 44. Not a teacher, but when I was bullied in middle school, the principal refused to believe that there was any bullying at the school, so he never took any action. Story 45. Future adults are traumatized because the parents of their bullies enable and exhibit entitlement. Story 46. Some teachers make the situation worse. My son was bullied this year in 3rd grade. Kids called him overweight and poor. I reported it, and their solution was to put the bullies and my son in a room to talk it out. I immediately refused. I would feel overwhelmed and frightened walking into a room with my bullies. I addressed my son's bullies myself. I spoke to the mothers at the school about some kids teasing my son. I am actively involved in the school, which is small, so word spread, and the teasing stopped. This only worked because I knew the parents would care. When I worked with high school students, I had zero tolerance for bullies. Cameras do not lie. Story 47. Because bullying is merely a symptom of a deeply dysfunctional society, and because teachers today do not have the necessary tools to address it. Story 48. My high school girlfriend was also a teacher who witnessed me being bullied. I had the opportunity to ask him, in a much nicer way, about the situation, considering he suspected I was touching his daughter's chest when he was not around. "What is going on?" He gave a lengthy response, but it came down to 3 main points. 1. Liability. Some students tease each other without malice and are actually friends. However, those who genuinely bully are often privileged children with powerful and demanding parents, or underprivileged students who will readily disrupt a teacher's authority. Becoming involved in any of those situations presents a liability for him. If he intervenes, the child being bullied might feel betrayed for telling, and parents may complicate his life. While he generally didn't worry about potential backlash, some teachers faced serious repercussions, like having their tires slashed or homes vandalized. He had to weigh whether it was worth the risk. Toughen up mentality. Some children need to learn to advocate for themselves, or they will face challenges later in life. It can be difficult to discern whether a student genuinely needs to toughen up or is struggling with personal issues that prevent them from standing up for themselves. This was the 1990s, so I understood where he was coming from. My own bullying ceased when I learned to stand up for myself, but that does not apply to everyone. Personal bias. Sometimes teachers just do not like certain students. Yes, that happens. Some students, particularly teenagers, can be quite annoying. While teachers cannot bully them, their peers often can. After I graduated, he told me that the only students he actively defended were those he recognized as having emotional challenges, difficult home lives, or who confided in him about being part of the LGBTQ+ community. Interestingly, he held homophobic views despite teaching sexual education and generally being a decent person. He understood that LGBTQ+ students were more likely to be bullied than their straight peers, and that the situation would not improve unless a teacher intervened. In his words, "No one ever got bullied into not being queer." That was probably as progressive as one could expect in Missouri during the 1990s. Then he confessed that he thought I was gay until I started dating his child. The joke's on him. I identify as non-binary. Everything I do is quite expressive of my identity. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.